going to put up my pretty slide so that we've got a nice background just to sort of start you off. Oh, I wish I was a bit quicker at these things.
Wish I was able to use it.
Yeah, I get confused what I'm doing. Here we go. Yeah. There we are. Yeah, so I'd just like to welcome, is it, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your name, James, I thought it was Sugrue or Serge, I can't
That's
quite
it, Sugrue.
Right, and Breda Murphy, Breda I came across on Twitter because I could see that she has been documenting a lot about the scandals in Ireland about the removal of babies from unmarried mothers, and Breda is working with impacted families and has invited James along, who is himself somebody who was born under those circumstances. So I will not say any more, but hand over to Breda to maybe tell us a little bit about herself and how she met James, for James to say it to us and to tell us his story.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for the invitation, Natalie, to attend. I've missed quite a few sessions, but I understand the importance and the fact that we can have these links and learn from one another. And many times we feel very alone when we actually fight a system. And the system is so powerful and so silencing that oftentimes we need the support outside of the jurisdiction, outside of Ireland, because we've exhausted almost all possibilities here to get justice for people who are now elderly in their latter years, who have waited for decades. I met James on this journey, and I'm aware that James is currently out of the country and it's very late where he is. So I can elaborate a little more afterwards so that I give James the stage now, the opportunity to tell you of his life and of his the responsibility of both powerful figures in the UK and Ireland to him as a UK-born citizen who was repatriated, and we would say renditioned to Ireland. You know, he had no choice in the matter, and from the moment he came to Ireland, his life changed drastically. So James, if you're happy, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, thanks, Breda. Well, as Breda said, I was born in 1951. My brother Michael was born in 1952, and my youngest brother 1958. My father was Irish and my mother was English. And we lived in Essex until I was 7.5. And then a decision was made by my parents to take us to Ballybunion in County Kerry, where my father was born. And my father went back to the UK to work. And then my mother, she decided within weeks of us being there to put us in a home in Killarney. It was actually the county home. It was formerly the workhouse. And she left and didn't come back. We were there for 10 months. My brother Michael and I had to sleep in a geriatric ward in a single bed, where we often saw terrible things with the old people dying in the night, screaming in the night. And, you know, it was a place where a lot of people were down and out. They were sleeping on straw beds in out sheds and things like that. It was just horrific. And we were under the jurisdiction of the state, obviously, and the managers of the state were the nuns. And this particular nun never liked us children. In fact, she called us names. She said we were English bastards and things like that, and laughed at our accents because we were British children. Just to stop you there, before I continue with what happened to us afterwards, I got some paperwork. Well, after a long struggle, I got paperwork from Tussler and various other organizations about us children. And it transpired that my mother actually wrote to the home 2 to 3 months after we were put in there asking about her children. And the nun in question wrote back and said, whatever she said in the letter, we'll never know, because either they won't release it to me or they say they can't find it. But allegedly the letter came back not known at this address. Now, I know when I got other paperwork, I found out that a decision had already been made by the nuns with the Sullivan family that took us out to board us out, in other words, foster us out, before my mother wrote. So they were never going to return us to my mother. They had no intention of doing it, even though other notes on the file said these children should be returned to the United Kingdom, but it was never done. And the United Kingdom authorities never made any inquiries as to where these children were. And I know this for a fact because I have a half brother in England that was put into care at the same time, and they were aware that we were there, but nothing. There was no checks were made where we were, what happened to us, and I know that also because my half brother. The authorities eventually got in touch with Kerry County Council and said, this boy has children in another country and they wanted him to visit us. And in 1967, they sent him over for 3 months. But we were just abandoned. Well, as I've always said, we were definitely the forgotten children, not just us 3 boys, but a lot of foster children that were in care at the time. During our year in the county home, we suffered horrendous abuse from the nun. She beat us, she laughed at us, she ridiculed us in every way she could. And eventually, one day, while we were going to on the way to school, she said, you are now leaving to go with your aunt and uncle. Well, we thought that was wonderful because my uncle was my father's brother, and we knew him from being in Ballybunion. But when these couple came, they were in their 70s. And I said, they're not my uncle and she's not my aunt. But we were forced to go with this family. And my young brother, David, who was only 18 months old at the time, was left behind. And we didn't see him for 11 years, even though he was only 40 miles away in another foster home where he suffered horrific abuse at the hands of his foster parents. We were taken on a bus to Kilgarvan in County Kerry, and I have no problem talking about where we went because I've documented it before, and the people that took us out, the Sullivan family, have all passed away. My brother and I were separated yet again. He was taken to the village to a family, the Sullivan family, who were related to the people that I was taken to in the country. So you can see from what I'm saying that we were taken out of the country to work. We were in farms, and obviously one of us was in one farm belonging to the family and the other in the other farm. I went to a house up a hill in a dreary, wet February day it was. I arrived there. There was no heating, no lighting, no running water. And I was forced then to sleep in a bed with a man that was now 25 years older than me. And during that time, I was sexually abused by him. I was not only sexually abused by him, but I was sexually abused by the foster father that took us out. During them 11 years, it was like living in a prison. I never went anywhere. I was never taken anywhere. I saw my brother for an hour on Sunday, apart from the time I saw him at school. He fared no better. He was beaten unmercifully by his foster parents. In fact, I witnessed some of the beatings. He was told to strip naked in the yard of the farm and to lie on the ground, and he was beaten severely for nothing. I remember one beating was because he allowed the pigs to get out of the piggery, and they ran around the yard. People in that village knew what was going on with him. They didn't with me because I was allocated in a country far away, but no one did anything. No, in fact, one lady, when my brother passed away when he was 40, by the way, he died very young. I don't think he ever got over the abuse that he suffered. But I met one lady, and she said to me shortly after he died, "We heard he screamed," she said, "and we did nothing. We did nothing," she said, "and we are ashamed for that." There were words, and there were kind words from one person, but it was too late, too little, too late. Something should have been done long before that. We should never have been in that position. I mean, shortly after we came to the foster homes, I suffered horrendous nightmares. I was continually shouting, screaming, climbing the walls, looking for my family. And the only sympathy I ever got was more beatings. There was no sympathy, and the idea of taking out boarded out children was in 1953. The recognition was that they were brought out for stability and affection. Well, there was no stability where I was. There was no affection where I was. And the other criteria that was brought out at the time was foster children should not be given to elderly couples. Well, that's exactly what they did. They were in their mid-70s when they took an 8-year-old child out. And the other criteria was that children should not be taken into the country. They should be where they mix with other children. I was taken away. First of all, my parents left. We were left in a home. We were beaten. We were separated from our baby brother. And then Michael and I, that never had a day apart, were separated. Our lives were never the same. And yet, when this redress scheme came out in relation to the mother and baby home, consideration was given in the chapter about the Commission's report. And it said in there that many boys were taken out and fostered, and many suffered severe abuse. And recently, I put a question to who is now the Prime Minister in Ireland, or is that what they call him, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, in the Dáil, through my TD, and I asked him why children like us were taken out and abused. And he turned around and he said that he had read the Commission's report and he recognized that a lot of boys were neglected and suffered lack of education. And a lot of girls were taken in to domestic situations. He also said that both he and Mr. Gorman, who was then the child minister, who is still the child minister, recognized this, and it's something the government could not ignore. But when it came to any form of redress, and not only redress, any form of recognition that we should have got, an apology that we should have got, because we were separate children. I didn't come from a mother and baby home. I came from a county home, which was probably worse. My mother and father were married, but at the same time, we were boarded out. We were under the jurisdiction of the state, and the state were now saying that we weren't entitled to any redress. And I have contacted Mr. Gorman quite a few times and asked him the questions. In fact, I had a Skype interview with him, and he turned around and said, what happened to my brother and I was actually appalling. He admitted that in an interview previous to that, when I went on prime time in Ireland. But yet again, we were just cast aside. I mean, the money is an issue for everybody, and it would be nice to get some kind of financial compensation. But for me, the fact that we never got any recognition, we never got any apology. We were a separate group, as I said in my interview on Primetime 2 years ago. We are a separate group. We were children that were in an institution. We were boarded out, and yet we were under the jurisdiction of the state, and now they were refusing to recognize us. And as Breda said, they probably never will. But while I have a breath in my body, I intend to fight this through whatever courts I can. I've actually already approached the Council of Human Rights in The Hague, and I've also written a letter to the European courts the European Parliament, sorry, they have acknowledged my letter, but I haven't heard anything since because I've been away for 2 months. But I want recognition, not just for my brothers and I want recognition for every single child that were in my position. I have a friend called Peter Mulryan, who was in the Tuam Mother and Baby Home, who was also boarded out, and he suffered the most horrific abuse. He won't mind me mentioning his name because we're in this together. And, you know, there are many more like us, but what I can never understand is why they're failing to recognize us as a group. Not only that, I believe that the English government, they had a duty of care for us as well, but no one's recognizing the duty of care that both governments had. In fact, the government here, well, they don't even acknowledge us being as a group or as individuals. I mean, 11 years I spent at that place. I had to work every day of my life. Before I went to school, I had to milk cows, I had to feed chickens, I had to walk 2 miles to school, and I was dressed in rags. The authorities, the social workers were absolutely, well, they might as well not have been there. They never came, and when they came, you were standing near the foster parent, so you were not going to say anything. We were never taken aside and spoken to how our treatment was. And I fail to recognize the fact that we, how should I put this? They were there to protect us, but actually they were the one that, in their own way, in my case, they were there for our detriment. I did my leaving certificate in Ireland, and I did quite well. And I got a place at university, and I asked the Kerry County Council if they'd help me in accommodation because I had nowhere to live. And that lady in particular said yes, they would. But I just couldn't believe when I got paperwork back some years ago what actually did happen. She wrote to the headmaster of my school and asked him what was his opinion of whether they should support me financially. And I have a letter that I've got in my from Tusla in my paperwork, and he wrote a letter back to her. This was a man that I looked up to, by the way, this headmaster of the school, and he said, James would be no better off with a good leaving cert than he would with a degree. And in my opinion, you should not be funding him. I just couldn't believe that, you know, everywhere we turned, somebody was there to block our progress, to help us. I left Kilgarvan, where I lived, on the 6th of July, a week after my leaving cert, and the Sullivan family gave me £15 to get to England to find a job and a place to live. The authorities did nothing whatsoever to give us some money to start us off. I mean, we were totally abandoned. And it's just not the fact that we've been abandoned then. We're being abandoned all over the years. When there's been redress schemes for the industrial schools and other institutions, us children that were boarded out have been cast aside. We have never been recognized. However, again, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin refutes that, saying that he mentioned the boarded out children in his apology. Well, yes, he did mention the boarded out children in his apology by saying children that were boarded out from the mother and baby home. We weren't in a mother and baby home, and several hundred children like us were not in mother and baby homes. So the apology did not extend to us. And that is my dilemma mostly, is the fact that this government and previous governments, it's not just this coalition, they have failed in their duty of care towards us. They have failed to recognize us, and they are still failing to recognize us. In fact, I've heard a lot of comments from people saying they're hoping that we'll die. I'm 72. There's a lot of people a lot older than me that have passed away. My brother was only 40. He's passed away 30 years ago. So they're hoping that Well, I think on the whole, they're hoping that people like me will shut up and go away, but I'm not going to. I don't know if that's of any benefit to your course thing or not, but my view is that the more recognition I can get for the boarded out children, especially my brothers and I that were British children, the British government have never ever recognised children like us. We might not have been abducted back to Ireland, but it's the same difference. We were brought back by my mother and abandoned in Ireland, and we are still being abandoned as adults by the failure of this government to recognise us and to give us the apology and you know, there are a lot of people out there that need this redress in some form or other. I mean, I believe that somebody spoke to me recently and said that they may give some redress in the form of years we spent in care, but I can never see that happening. That's only words, and words don't mean anything without actions. I don't know if that's any benefit, but yeah. There's a lot more I can say about my life, you know, about what happened to us, but you know, it would probably take about 3 hours to do it.
Well, I can imagine, and I have known about in Ireland for a long time, but I feel that since starting to look into the material that Breda sent me, I feel that I even a part of it, and I feel that this is something that should be continuous in everybody's home until it gets sorted out. Breda would, yeah, I think it's probably because I think Breda's off mute. I'm going to be quiet and pass over to Breda. Breda, we'd love to hear from you to help us understand more.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I can't put on the camera. Thank you, James, for that. And how do I follow that? You know, this is the dilemma many times for us. We hear those stories and we walk this journey with people who have been abused by the state many decades ago and who continue to be abused by the state. And I've sat with James in our Houses of Parliament, both in Dáil Éireann and in the equivalent of the House of Lords, which is the Seanad. And both are quite accessible here because members of the opposition have realised the journey we're on and have supported us. So when there's a hearing, we are alerted, we are invited, and we receive those invitations from opposition and attend. Now, in the most recent time, when the government itself, and of course they have the majority in both of those houses, when they put forward the redress proposals, and there were many discussions, and they commissioned many reports. And among the reports they commissioned, which will be of interest to your members fighting the same battle, they denied the mother and child relationship, the bonding, the attachment. And so Minister O'Gorman has said and has apologised for reflecting it in such a way that for the first 6 months, the children who were in the homes for 6 months only, they will not get any redress. Like James, the apology doesn't reach them. Regardless of how you say, I apologise for what you went through, unless that's accompanied by action and meaningful action, it is absolutely worthless. So the early life and the attachment a mum and her child is denied, that impacts lifelong, and not alone lifelong, but into the next generation and the next generation. And yesterday, when I clicked in, I heard at one point somebody was speaking, and there was a gentleman called Patrick who was on camera, and he shook his head at you know, mums and been given perhaps greater recognition of their love for their child. And I would like at this point to speak for men as well, because within the Irish conversation, continuously, there is this suggestion that fathers did not care. And I
They
know
did.
situations, and I would like James just to tell you about how his dad cared for him. Because, James, I think it's important. Many times nobody carries that voice, and you carry your father's memory in that. So if you'd like, I'll click off again for the microphone for a moment.
Yeah, going back to my mother, and God rest her, my mother, when we were children, was never very stable. She had mental health problems all her life, and I don't blame her one bit for what happened. She tried to get us back, but remember in 1960 there was no mobile phones, no emails, no nothing, and she was a very vulnerable person. And they knew that because she was in the hospital for a week or so, and they decided not to give him back to her. Going back to my father, people have asked me, well, why didn't he come? Well, fathers didn't have any rights in them days. It was the mother that had the rights. And he also told me when I met my father within 2 years of going to England, and he told me that he thought we'd be better off in Ireland than we would with my mother. And he was probably right, because we were in homes before we came to England at all. So they were well aware that my mother was a vulnerable person, that she couldn't look after her children, and we were taken into care twice. I remember the second time I was about maybe 5, 6, and we were in a home, and my mother had abandoned us actually, and my father came home from work and brought us back out, and eventually she came home. But he would have had no jurisdiction over his own children, regardless of what people have said to me. He would have, I mean, when I told him the story, and it's a horrific story, I have written a very long statement about what happened to us that I couldn't do here, because it's very upsetting, and I get upset when I read some of it. But I don't blame either of the two of them for what happened. It was just one of those things that but the state were obviously the people that took us over. They did not look after us. They neglected us. I mean, I got acne when I was about 12 years old, which is very young to get acne, and I have so many scars on my body. And when I went to England at the age of 19, I had to go to hospital because I was so badly infected, and they said it was the worst acne they had ever seen. So you, I mean, these people, the Sullivan family, were by no means a poor family. They were given a maintenance grant and a clothing grant to look after us children. On top of that, we had to work like slaves, literally like slaves. And if you didn't do what they wanted, you were beaten, you were abused. You know that I was so badly fed. I went to secondary school for 5 years, and my lunch every day for 5 years was 2 pieces of soda bread, nothing else. I got home in the evening, and my meal every evening of my life was 2 potatoes left by the side of the fire and 2 pieces of cold bacon. That was the kind of life. I never had a bath for 10 years. They never had a tin bath. I mean, the neglect was notorious. It was quite, I mean, when the social workers came, I remember them one day that they were there. They asked the Mrs. Sullivan, who was not a bad person, by the way. Mrs. Sullivan wasn't, this was the old man's wife. It was him and his son were the abusers. They asked her, can we see James's room? And of course, she knew very well that there wasn't 2 beds in the room that was put on the list when we boarded out. And she made an excuse that, oh, it's a bit untidy, maybe you'll look at it the next time. There was no next time. And that was the kind of neglect that this government are responsible for, are accountable for, and yet they still will not recognize us. They will not give us the time of day. I've been up, as Breda says, I've been on protests, I've written to all of them, but you get this. I mean, they're trying to say that they're dealing with the boarded out children in a different way. They're offering us an enhanced medical card and some counselling if we need it. That's not redress. redress is the form of financial compensation and apology. And whatever Mr. Gorman says and Mr. Varadkar and all the rest of them, that kind of thing, that's to me is the biggest insult, that they're saying, well, we'll give them an enhanced medical card and we'll give them the opportunity of counselling and to be part of this memorialisation that they're going to have in Dublin. That memorialisation is for the mother and baby home survivors. I wasn't ever interviewed about my position, so how can I be part of a memorialisation that doesn't consider us? So it's just a complete insult, and how, I don't know what. I mean, I know they probably think there's an election coming up soon, and maybe the whole thing will wash away, or they might be thrown out of power. I mean, that might be a part of it, but they don't seem to want to have anything to do with children that were boarded out. Every time I remember when the mother and baby home redress plan was brought out, Mr. Gorman was on Morning Ireland. And one of the questions that was asked by the interviewer was, what about the redress for the boarded out children? He said, there's none. That was his words. It was as blunt as that. And as Breda said, every child that was in a mother and baby home and other institutions under 6 months are not even being recognised. I mean, I don't know how they can do that, how they can differentiate between 6 months and a day or 365 or 366 days. You'll get it, but the 364th day child won't get it. There's a day or two difference. How can they do that? But that's exactly what they have done. And unless people support my view of it, that we need to take action against the government and be seen to be proactive in bringing some kind of plan together to not to force them, but to make them recognize that the day has come when they have to make some kind of retribution to children that were in their care for so many years. And I mean, this wasn't a year or two. I was in care from 1960 till I left in 71. And there were years, I mean, not every single year was bad. I had a lot of friends at school. But living with this family and seeing what happened to my brother and the fact that he's no longer with us, it really fills me with not hatred towards the government, but fills me with a delusion that nothing is ever going to be done for us unless we organize something and stick together is the main thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got so much going through my mind hearing what you're saying, but I can't help drawing parallels with, hearing the word, was it Tulsa or Tuzla?
Tusla, I think, T-U-S-L-A.
Tulsa, yeah. Thinking about Sinead O'Connor and her son and what happened to them, and the number of women. I don't know if there are any people on the call right now who are involved in cases in Ireland. I'm in touch with a number of mothers and a couple of organisations who are representing mothers who are to this very day fighting with the government because their children have been taken from their care because they've reported that they and or their children have been abused by their former partners. And I have had a mother saying to me, I don't know if I can carry on. This is what it reduces people to. I believe that what you said about coming together is very powerful, because what you endured and what our children are enduring is quite similar. I feel that there are quite a few parallels. The treatment by Tuzla, the way that mothers and children are treated, and fathers too. We've been talking a lot in these last couple of days about the role of fathers in this as well. And I know I've seen the testimony in the Australian Parliament of the victims of the same, forced adoption scandals, or I can't quite remember, but there were fathers saying that they were absolutely devastated because although they were not married to the mothers, they still cared about their children, and it impacted their lives very seriously. That the Australian government apologised.
Yes, I know they did.
Yeah, I don't know.
And that apology was so heartfelt. I listened to every word of it. When you compare it to the apology that the mother and baby home survivors got, well, there was no content to that at all. It was a quick few words here and there. Oh, it's shameful. You shouldn't have been there. The shame is not yours, it's ours. And even they were blaming society. Well, it wasn't society that did it. It was the government that organised the boarded out scheme and the mother and baby home scheme as well. So, but when I listened to, I forget what her name was, Janet something, the lady that did it. She was the Prime Minister of Australia. But it was such a heartfelt and heartwarming apology, and so sincere. Our apology, well, not our apology, but the apology to the mother and baby home survivors, to me, lacked any kind of sympathy. It was just an exercise saying, well, we've done it.
And you're supposed to feel grateful. And I believe we've just had the conclusion of inquiry into what they're calling historic forced adoption in England or in the United Kingdom. And I believe that the British government to this day has refused to apologise.
Yes, they have. Yeah, I mean, one thing I can't understand is my brother David was only 18 months. Actually, he was only when we been there. So he was about 20 months. Why he never ended up in America, I don't know. Maybe it's because he was a British child that they couldn't do it without the mother's consent, and she definitely wouldn't have consented to that. But I mean, he was only 14 miles away from us. This is how me when I asked the social worker on a number of but don't worry about it. He's fine, you know. And I said to her, but where is he? And it's not until I was 19 years old when I stood in the county council offices and I said, I'm not leaving here until you tell me where my brother is. And eventually gave me his address. He was actually 40 miles away from where I lived. And in them 11 years, he actually didn't know I had two brothers. I met him on the farm. I recognized him straight away because he looked sort of like me. And I was speaking to the foster family, and all they kept saying is, and I remember their words, oh, your effing parents, what good were they? And I said, you don't know anything about my parents, you know. And when I met David the second time, I got him on his own, and I said to him, what was life like there? He was sexually abused by two men in that family. He made a complaint to the police, and it never went anywhere. But I asked him also about his schooling because he couldn't hardly read and write. He said he hardly ever went to school. And when he went to school, the man that he lived with, and this is documented, by the way, said, give David a good trouncing. And the teacher has written a note that I've got. The only way to deal with David was to give him a good trouncing every day. This was the kind of thing that they looked on. And I also found out from him when we've been discussing it over the years that for years David thought his name was David Lynch because that was the name of the people that took him out, and he never knew his name was Sugrue. At the age of 13, just quickly tell you a little bit about him. At the age of 13, the foster father died, who was very abusive, and the mother said she didn't want him anymore. But David ran away, and he was brought into care again. And he was taken back to the county home in Killarney, of all places. And because he was so traumatized by what happened to him, he'd admit this himself. He called himself a mountainy man. He said, I was out of control. They actually gave him shockwave treatment. They thought he had epilepsy. They shaved his head and gave him shockwave treatment at the age of 13. Where was the consent for that? Who was not responsible? My brother didn't have epilepsy. It was just that he said I was in such a bad place that I rebelled against everything, and I don't blame him. So as I was saying, instead of keeping us together, they pushed us apart as a family. I mean, my brother David and I took years to get to know him, because I actually didn't know him. You know, I knew him as a baby. And with my brother Michael, you know, the only time we saw each other was for half an hour on Sunday, or an hour on Sunday. You know, and the authorities knew all this, but there's so much more I could tell you about his story, but it would take too long. Yeah.
Yeah. James, I see you're on a phone, I think, so I'm not sure if you're able to see all of the messages that the people listening are
see
sending
them coming
you.
up. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
have
do.
so much support. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much, you know, that I could ask, and I would love to give other people the opportunity to answer that something as well. But if I may just ask, you know, clearly you've gone to rebuild your life, and I just wonder if you might just outline quickly for people, you know, what did that journey look like?
Well, I met my father in 1972, and my mother. She was actually looking for a divorce from my father, and it was amazing how the authorities could get in touch with Ireland then to find out where the children were. We were not children. Mick was 18 and I was 19, but David was still only 12. And they found out that we were in England, and I got a letter in Hammersmith one Christmas in 71, and I immediately contacted the solicitors and said, well, where is my mother? I would like to see her, because I always wanted to see my parents. I was never going to not see them, and I knew one day I would. So she was actually living 2 stops on the tube from me in Latimer Road, which is 2 stops from Hammersmith. And I went to see her, and she was living in a bombed out house. She was well, I recognized her straight away when she opened the door. And shortly after that, my uncle, who was living around there at the time, took me over to Blackheath in southeast London, and I met my father. And I think it was the happiest day of my life, because I remember as a child, I actually didn't get on with my dad. We clashed a lot because I think we were very similar, but I was more happy to see him. And then he told me the story of what happened to us, and that's what I've told you, some of that. But I didn't tell him about what happened to us in total for 15 years. It was so traumatic for me to tell him, but he always said to me, I know there's something wrong with you, but you won't tell me. But one day when we were in the house, and I was really upset because I suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, he said to me, I'm not going out until you tell me. And I told him the story. And it was the most horrific day, just to tell my father that I was abused by 2 men. But I had to make him promise that he wouldn't do anything before I told him, because I think he might have done something, against the law. And so what happened then is that I was not in a good place at the time to do anything. So I applied to teach at training college, and I actually got in, but I wasn't in a good place, and I gave the course up. I just couldn't do it. So my father was a manager of a painting and decorating firm. So I decided to work, and even though he was quite against it, he said, you should do something more than this. But I liked it, and I did my City and Guilds in painting and decorating, and I was a painter and decorator for 20 years. But then in 1993, I was working at Euro Disney when they were working there. I was a foreman painter at Euro Disney in Paris. And I hurt my back, and the doctors told me if I continued to work as a painter and decorator later, that I would end up probably totally disabled. So I decided to go to university, and I did a law degree. And in 2000, I became a solicitor, a criminal law solicitor, and I did that for 19 years. And yeah, so that was that. So academically, I did fine, and I was able to buy my own house. But what happened to us all those years ago never goes away. It's always there in the background. Some days I feel fine, other days I can think of nothing else. And the tragic thing about it is the brother Michael that died. We were on. There was only a year between us, but he come to my house, and we'd spend hours talking about it. But when he passed away in '93, I lost that support. It's already all right talking to people like you or my dad even, but they weren't there. He went through horrible times, and so did I, and we knew what was going on. But it since my father passed away in 2012, life hasn't been very easy for me. I find myself flitting from one address to the other. I sell my house and buy another one and move on, and I'm always moving. I've spent the last 2 months in Australia because I have some good friends here, and they're very supportive, but Australia is a long way away. So, I mean, they want me to come and live here, but it's impossible to get into Australia now. But it's something I wouldn't mind doing, but that's another story. But yeah, so I got on all right financially, but I went through a lot of. I have had some counselling over the years, and spoke about what happened, and it helps, but it doesn't cure. It's just a bandage. It's just a plaster on a wound, and but you know, I've learned to live with it. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're really honoured and privileged to, for you to share your story with us. Thank you so much. I appreciate it getting very late where you are. I would just wonder, do you have time maybe to answer a couple of questions?
Oh yeah, I'm fine. I don't go to bed till 12 o'clock anyway, so it's only 11:30. Yeah.
Okay. Just wondering if there's any hands, or maybe Breda could come back in again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to say, anytime I hear a survivor story, I realise the David and Goliath battle that we face. And I didn't always. I gave a presentation, or I attended an event once, and I was asked in that how I made the transition from academia to becoming an advocate. And my postgrad in any event is in public advocacy and activism. But one day, 10 years ago, I went to the local library where people who had been in the mother and baby home in Tuam were gathered. And they were seeking justice. And the age profile, they weren't young people. And I saw, Catherine Corliss was there that very first day. And I saw what was being pitted against them in a way. And I thought, I'll help. And so they asked me to be secretary. And I said, I'll take it on for 3 months, and, somebody else will step up to the plate. And that is 10 years ago. And regardless of my age and experience and everything, if somebody had said to me, this will take you 5 years, I wouldn't have believed them. If they said it will take 10 years and you still will not get justice, I would have thought they were bonkers. But the challenge that we face is that it's not one institution that we are fighting. It is both church and state. And when, like many of your members will understand, you are denied access to documentation. So any of the material that was gathered, the 60,000 documents that the Commission of Inquiry into Mother and Baby Homes acquired, that they tried to suppress for 75 years. They brought in a bill. That bill, thankfully, many people both in the UK came across and ensured survivors throughout the world ensured that that would not be the case. However, those documents are still out of reach because they're under the 30-year rule. And the Commission of Investigation was supposed to deliver in a timely fashion, very like, I suppose, what you've seen with the postmasters in the UK. When an inquiry is put in place, it means that all the documentation which previously could have been available to you, because it had already expired the 30-year rule, and that would have been available through freedom of information, that becomes suppressed. So you have no access to those documents while the commission is in place. And that went on for 6 years. And following that, it is now suppressed and out of reach for another 30 years. Meanwhile, if you look back to Ireland and how they dealt with the commission to inquire into child abuse, that went on for 10 years. The documentation acquired in that, which showed, like for mother and baby homes and the institutions that James was in, children were subjected to vaccine trials without parental consent, for instance. And the information acquired in 1999 up to 2009 was then required by law to be sent back to those who submitted it or gave it. The same thing happened for the Catholic Church. And so even with the documentation for the Magdalene inquiry, for instance, into the Magdalene laundries, that is in safekeeping with the Department of the Taoiseach. So the Department of the Prime Minister holds that. It is not available to postgraduates like me or to survivors of any of those institutions. And for a long time, survivors, let's say, if they were adopted, if their name was changed, if they were illegally adopted, they could not access their birth details. And that was continuously for many, many decades. And so there were 3 pieces of legislation that were passed, and those in the recent year and a half. And those pieces of legislation deny us continuously. They are never person-centered. And so when I advise people on becoming involved at the early stages of an inquiry, make sure you have advice on how ultimately justice will be delivered, because in our case, it hasn't been. And so when the Commission's report was published in January the 11th, 2021, 2 days before it was published, and that would be our first time seeing it, and 550 participants gave their testimony, like James does there. They gave their testimony to the confidential committee. 19 gave their testimony to the investigative committee, which was more legally based. And the 550, their testimony was dismissed and disregarded. And the survivors who contributed were not given sight of their contribution. So anybody who gave an oral testimony, unlike a court of law, they weren't allowed to retrieve that copy testimony. It was kept from them indefinitely. So they couldn't add to it, they couldn't check it, they couldn't report on it. And much of justice in Ireland, what the government do, they actually silence the survivor of abuse by, in this case, people have signed waivers that they will not say how much money they were awarded. They will also, for mother and baby home survivors, and the awards are as little as €5,000, they are required to sign a waiver that they will not take a case either against the state or the institutions they protect. So one could argue they continue to protect the institutions of church and the institutions of the pharmaceutical companies. So for any of your listeners, when you are fighting a battle like that, and we have no resources. I mean, when people say to me, how do you make that transition? How did you do it? I did it because I thought my skills would really, really help. And one good thing that I'm proud of is that radio stations do interview me, or I get this opportunity. And I want to be the voice of change. I want to be the voice for people like James. And I'm so thrilled that James carries the story. But what I hear when I hear James speak, I hear him speak for the child, and particularly the child he didn't save, his own brother. Because I've sat in rooms, I get phone calls from the United States and the UK, and somebody calls to say, Breda, I've got your name from wherever, and my mum has passed away, but I've just learned I have a sibling who has died in one of these institutions. And the die is set against them, everything from the outcome, because you're constantly fighting for recognition, and you're fighting a system that does not even recognize you, as it doesn't recognize James. The boarded out from mother and baby homes are ignored as well. And that's how James has formed an alliance with Peter Mulryan, who was in a mother and baby home. They do not, the state was responsible for them until the age of 16. But it only looks at the age 0, well, not even 0, they have to be 6 months, from 6 months to perhaps 4.5 to 5 years. Most boys from the Tuam mother and baby home in particular were boarded out at the age of 4.5 to 5. The girls were boarded out at the age of 7. And that is akin to fostering, where the foster family or boarded out family received payments to keep that child, to educate the child, to clothe the child. They even got a special clothing allowance. They entered a contract, and yet those children, many of them were enslaved, and enslaved as a 5-year-old child to feed animals in the morning and in the evening and not attend school. The abuse, when people say it's historic, you know, those are historic, they're in the past. I'm quick to point out that we can never, ever reflect it being historic when it's a continuum and the abuse continues. It for a child, and for today, for James in his 70s, it is as raw and as fierce, and perhaps even more so, because you regret the loss of life for your brother, but also the loss of being able to save him. And I meet with that so many times. I've met people who are so traumatized by being unable to save the sibling, and yet they were children themselves. We attended a book launch of the house children, they were called. And these were children who had immigrated to the United States as adults, who had been born in mother and baby home in Tuam, who had then been sent to the orphanage, because trafficking was a real feature that has not been detailed within enough or acknowledged enough by government. And so when that book launch came about, and the author Heidi Danielle is an American with Irish heritage, when it came out and she came over to a launch, we were invited, and we went along to, as it happens, it is the former Sisters of Mercy Chapel at their orphanage. It is now a library. So we went along and we listened for a little while, and then she asked if there were any people who would like to speak. And so our survivors spoke, and one of them, his 3 sisters, had been there. And this man beside me, an elderly man, began to weep, and uncontrollably. And I asked, was he okay? And his response was, I knew, just like James said with that lady who came to them, I knew, but I did nothing. He was a child too. So they carry the trauma, the community carries the trauma, but it's more pronounced and more acute within the families who have suffered. And I think until we get to a stage where every politician understands exactly what it meant and how you carry that, the trauma will not lift. And all the counselling in the world will not help anybody until such time as the authorities who have caused such distress step up to the plate, admit their failings, make a heartfelt contribution. To date, we've had years of talking to the church. The state itself has impacted since 2001, May 2001 to May 2023, for 2 years, with the six church orders and one Catholic entity that were involved in the mother and baby home and the running of those homes. The state failed in its efforts to extract any real contribution, any financial contribution. So they appointed a lady to negotiate with religious orders. Now, I questioned that appointment, because the state, the arms of the state, they have so many resources, and if they can't do it, and if they cannot compel the religious orders not just to give a financial contribution, but to open their records, the real plus, and I've met with the All Ireland Primate, who's the head of the Catholic Church in Ireland, and I have to mention here Derek Leinster, who Derek was in the Protestant Bethany orphanage and passed away within the last year. And Derek was the most amazing advocate for years. Himself and his wife, Carol, they've both passed away. And what is happening is that we are losing the people with the strongest voice. So when that happens and they speak to me, these are powerful figures, they can say that's anecdotal, even if it's on an affidavit. They can still say it's, they can suppress my voice or suppress the testimonies I've heard. And I think the battle for us needs to be taken outside of Ireland. It needs to be in the UN. It needs to be in Europe. It needs to be international. We need to join forces with every community, every child that's suffering abuse by the powerful institutions that hold power over them. And that's one of the best things about here. We are learning through what you are giving us continuously. And I think we need to share knowledge, share information, become fierce, emboldened, not apologize for anything we are doing, but meet those who block us and try to suppress us, and continuously ask for the documentary evidence. Because when evidence is kept from you, or when in the UK, for instance, I've seen where victims of rape are required to pay upwards to 25,000 for a transcript of their trial. Who does that really affect? It affects those who cannot pay, and who can pay 25,000. I mean, I think we should have a GoFundMe, particularly for those instances. We need to recognize our own power as people, as a group. The Commission of Investigation has said, and the government have agreed to remove and excavate and exhume the 796 children, babies and children who perished in Tuam, which is close to where I live and where I regularly visit. I've asked our leaders, and particularly the Minister for Children, what if there are not 796 sets of remains there of children? What then? Because many children we know were illegally trafficked. Some children, as with what I've sent you, Natalie, have had 3 birth certs from 3 different jurisdictions. Yeah. So how do you explain that? And Karen, who lives by the identity, which is her American passport, and she knows it to be false. She lives by that because as a child, it's the only one she knew. She was born in the north of Ireland to a mother who had come from the south of Ireland. And so she had her first birth cert from Newry, a mother and baby home in the north of Ireland, and then moved to Stanmullen, from where she was trafficked as a child. So in the south, which is in County Meath, she got another birth cert, and yet another in the United States. So the trafficking, the vaccine trials, the anatomical research on the deceased children, many of those issues have not at all been comprehensively, forensically looked at. And so the state has allowed many institutions to get off the hook. And I think that promotes a false narrative that people like James and I cannot live with. And sadly, too many people turn away from the battle. Now, some turn away because they become exhausted. And I really have to hold my hand up to them and say, you've done your best. But I think it is our responsibility as people with the voice and people who can frame it and bring together the complexities and show the misinformation many times and what the government promote. I mean, our government here have 70 special advisors at their fingertips. They have immense resources, taxpayer funds to employ others. They continuously silence us. I mean, to the point of, and not from them alone, but I have received, for instance, solicitors' letters attempting to silence me. And that's not unique. I mean, I think they will use every ploy in the book, those who do not want you to speak. But thankfully, I'm respected within this area. And I will continue, like James has said, until my last breath, for mothers, for fathers, for children, for families, for the oppressed, for the vulnerable and the silenced. And I think if we all have that attitude, then we are a powerful force, and recognize our power, come together, hold more of those, share the information. I will give various links to you, Natalie, that you will be then able, and I will keep you informed. And then you will be able to share with listeners here who maybe want to have their own journey. And it may be in the UK, United States, Sweden, wherever, but it matches with ours. And I think we have to really empower ourselves. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free.
Oh, thank you ever so much. It made me feel quite emotional because I didn't quite expect such a sort of positive outcome from this conversation. But I think that you have got a bunch of natural allies from, families going through the same thing in Ireland and across the world at the moment. And what seems to be with this community, about these, I would call them unlawful child removals, it is a global phenomenon, and there does seem to be an appetite to create a global movement. And I don't know if I mentioned earlier, not just about the child removals, but yesterday we had a mother speaking about her experience as the mother of 3 children with autism, and the way that she's been treated by medical services. And this is an issue that's impacting a lot of families, and it intersects with child removal, because when you advocate for your child, then the authorities will start child protection proceedings against you. It does feel like there's a lot of segments, where we're natural allies, and exactly what you said about fighting for the children, for their mothers, for their fathers, for families, and just in general for justice and integrity. Rosie spoke earlier about the financial fraud going on. Well, if we would like redress, what about all of this money that's been taken from us? Not just by the legal profession and financial institutions, but also some of the mental health professionals, practitioners, I wouldn't call them professionals, who we turned to thinking that they would help us, but actually victimized us. And I could go on. I see Nicolette's raised her hand. Nicolette, go ahead, please. If you might be on mute, Nicolette. Nikki, we can't hear you. I think she's struggling to get off mute.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to thank for this amazing presentation, and I think the EU has been turned in through the arbitrary child abduction convention and adoption convention into a huge mother baby care home, where the European Union as a legislator, including the UK when it was a member, Ireland still a member, can take any child from any primary caregiver mother in every member state. You know, Natalie, what I mean? So I think our natural allies are absolutely here, and I'm so grateful and hungry to know even more about the situation in Ireland, because this is happening in the EU with almost 450 million people. Because of the Child Abduction Convention, the Hague Adoption Convention, and because of secondary European Union law, the former Brussels II regulation and the new recast, you know, Natalie, the horrific Council Regulation 2019/1111, any child can be taken away from the primary caregiver, usually the mother, based on a child custody judgment, first instance from another member state, against which, if it is executable, you have no appeal. So the EU is a huge mother-baby care home where primary caregiver mothers are punished. I mean, Mother's Revolution wrote it's a mummicide. They are literally taking away our livelihood, our possibility to raise our children. And then they can prosecute the mothers and put the children into care or put the children up to adoption. So the European Union must stop this through the lens of trafficking, corruption, organized crime, which are very serious Euro crimes in the EU treaties, in the Treaty on Functioning of the European Union described as such. And the EU must combat this. In Child Abduction Convention and Adoption Convention through Hexit must be abolished between the EU member states, including Ireland, and new regulations must be put on the table to give safety.
I agree, Nicola, and I would add that really it feels as though the lobbies which have turned child protection, adoption and fostering into an industry, which
Yes.
is really ramping up.
Yes.
It's really bad in England, in the UK, in Europe. It is taking hold, and James mentioned, I believe, I read your stories that Breda sent through, that there were elements of modern slavery identified in your case, and I believe that this is true of contemporary cases now. I'm going to speak at 5 o'clock about what I learned in Croatia about the illegal adoption, which was whitewashed as legal, in Croatia, of dozens of children from Democratic Republic of Congo. That's one instance of, I think we've got Adoptee Watch here, who's an adult adoptee.
Yes.
You know, it feels you as a child become a slave to the extent that you go to an adoptive family and you have to play act their child for the rest of your life and strip your identity. With fostering in the UK and Europe as well, I believe foster parents are offered enormous amounts of money by fostering agencies who've got enormous budgets to look after children who could have been very well looked after in their own homes by families who are absolutely desperate to keep them, instead of giving huge wadges of government, of taxpayers' money to foster carers who I have heard cases of contemporary abuse in foster care. What James said about the social worker ignoring his neglect also is what I have heard by a young girl who showed me photographs of handcuff marks on her arms because she tried to get to her siblings. Can you believe that we're treating children like this right now? It's horrifying. Yeah. So this is why it feels like an absolutely crucial moment, to stand up as an outraged public. This should be a broad public issue against this horrific maltreatment of children and families.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, thank you, James. We appreciate your solidarity from you and from Breda. I think there's another hand in there. There was, Jane, please. Jane spoke very compellingly this morning.
Hello, hi. Thank you, James, for your story. I just wanted to say about the mother and baby homes now, that are they're actually corporate businesses run by private companies, private individuals. And I was in London on one of our demonstrations, and I was staying in Camden Town with another advocate for the children. And we walked down a road, and she was very knowledgeable about where these mother and baby places were, and she pointed out 5 big Victorian homes on one road that were mother and baby homes. This is happening on an industrial scale now, right now. So what happens is when they come and they've, I actually spoke to one of these ladies. They come into social services and they say, well, I haven't got anywhere to live. My boyfriend's kicked me out or something. They put them in these homes. And then when they've had the baby, they have to have a parenting assessment and they fail. I mean, they might be the odd one, but the majority of them fail the parenting assessment and they just leave without their babies. This is industrial scale child trafficking. And baby farming. I call them baby farms, these places. And imagine how many there are if that was just on one road. And then we were in Luton doing an awareness day. Well, I don't call them protests. I just say, we are making the public aware. We are sharing information on the street because that's the only way we can do it. We're blocked on social media. And a lady came up to me, a young woman with a baby in a pram. And she said, I've been listening to your talk. She said, I can tell you that I escaped from one of these baby homes. She said, I was told that it was just a place where I could stay until I got a house. And they had security on the door. They weren't allowed out of the house without one of these security people with them. They didn't have handles on the inside of the door, so they couldn't escape. And the way she escaped was she recognised that there was something seriously wrong. She couldn't go out on her own. So she rang 999 and told them she had a medical emergency. She was pregnant, heavily pregnant, ready to have the baby any day. And the ambulance came and they took her away. And she said that was the only way that I could escape from this home. And that was only that's now. That's happening right now. And
a young woman I got in touch with who I invited specifically if she could, join this call. I hope that she's here because she told me of a very, very similar thing in another part of the country. Quite some years ago, there were the cases involved with the Dr. George Hibbert and a place called Tadpole Cottage, where mothers and small children were taken in for assessment, mothers and babies, and never to come out, with their children. So it just sort of feels like history is repeating itself. It's awful. Yeah. And the level of corruption, we're talking about the EU, I really believe that this is becoming embedded in policy. And so there are people who are looking into this, and it really doesn't help when there are lots of concerns about corruption at a political level. Maria, would you like to speak? Or James, did you want to respond? Or
no, I've been listening to everything everybody said, and my main view of all of this is that a lot of survivors are very disunited. you know, you'd hear one saying, well, we're getting our money from mother and baby home, and they don't want to know anything about any other groups. I'm all for every group helping each other. And if there were, I've been on protests, I've actually put it on Facebook, I've put it on Twitter, and I've had people, oh, yes, it's a terrible, we'll be there. And the same people, the same 15 people turn up all the time. And yet, you know, you hear stories. It's no good giving you a story if you're not prepared to commit to it. You know, I mean, I was on prime time with two other gentlemen in 21 on the telly. And I contacted one of them, and he told me, and he won't mind me saying this, that Mr. Gorman said to him, "We look after you," and he believes that. I'm afraid, I said, to this gentleman, Mr. Gorman will not look after you because he's already said he's not giving anything to the boarded out children. Now, the other gentleman I couldn't get in touch with, he had another horrendous story. Both of them had horrendous stories. And I'd like to know at the end of the day, when this program finishes, I don't mind if you give my email address to anybody that's interested in speaking to me, that has been in a position like us, that wants to take it further, would join me. I have already got a couple of people that have contacted me, but obviously I'm away in Australia until the 5th of February. And I'm hoping that that a group action will help more than my individual efforts on behalf of my brother that's deceased and my younger brother. Obviously, he can speak for himself. But as I said, I have contacted the Human Rights Council. I haven't heard back from them, but I have heard back from the European Parliament, and they have said we will be looking at it, but obviously they're very busy. Now, just to point out another thing that was promised to me by Mr. Gorman was in relation to early life information. Well, I wasn't in a mother and baby home, but all my information is in there. And this is how ironic the promises that Tutsler have made about early life information. I wrote a letter to Kerry County Council when I was 19 about my brother David that was put back into care. I went to see him in this home, and I thought, this home is not right. There's something odd about it. I don't like the brothers that were running it. And I have these letters replies from the social worker. You are bitter and twisted. You should leave your brother alone. He's happy where he is. Well, years later, it transpired that he wasn't happy where he was. Neither were a lot of the other children that were sexually abused, and some of them brothers went to prison. Now, this is the point I'm trying to make. I applied for papers. I've been doing it for 15 years now, and I got, it was really funny. It's not funny, really. A letter that I wrote to Kerry County Council about my brother David, my own letter was redacted. They redacted my own letter. So if they're redacting my own letter that I know what the content of it is, what else are they redacting? You know, and I've heard these stories from other people, and I've seen it on Twitter, that promises have been made, but I've had letters come back that have redacted my own brother's names. These boys, James Sugrue, ... I mean, what is the point in having this promise of early life information if they're not going to abide by some kind of ethics? I mean, is it the staff that they employ that don't know what they're doing? Because I believe that's some part of it, probably. Or they're not interested, so they just redact everything they're told to redact. I've made several applications about my letters that my mother wrote, including my own baptismal certificate that's documented, and yet they say that it's not there. So anyway, it's just a point that I made.
Oh no, I'm just smiling actually, because one of the people that I'm in touch with in Europe who's actually seeking for answers from the European Union bodies received an answer which was essentially a number of pages of A4 which were just black rectangles.
Yeah.
It had been
Exactly.
impacted. Yeah. James, if you're on Twitter, I'm sure that many of us would like to follow you and connect with you.
Yes, I am on Twitter. Yes, I'm. Or X, what they call it now.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. I can see you're on a phone. It's probably difficult. I don't know if maybe Breda might be able to pop your Twitter link to your Twitter account in the.
Yes,
the
you
chat.
can do that.
Yeah, wonderful. I think maybe we.
There's some other people who want to speak.
Yeah, we're probably
James.
better wrap up soon because
Okay.
I don't want to keep you up beyond midnight, and we all probably
No, it's
need
fine.
a little bit of a. Oh, thank you ever so much. I know that Maria had her hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to thank James for the story. What I found in Switzerland, in contemporary Switzerland, mimics the history, and I regretted very much that I was not aware of the history before I came across of the network of the foster care, social educators, and pedophiles. And I just wanted to add that in Switzerland currently, child labor is within the law. So it's allowed to force children to live on the farm and to work. And also there are special clinics to reset the mother and baby bond. And they're basically like prisons. And everything that family courts are doing is coming along the same lines as what was previously done by the church. And now in some cases, there are apologies issued and acknowledgements issued by the state saying that because it was the church, it was not lawful. However, if one looks at what has been happening since the family courts were established and the custody battles were established, it's the same practices, but now they are quote marks within the law. So it's going to be even harder to argue with the current shape and form of the same practices than it was before. And I think it's very, very important to establish that there is no separation between the history and the current moment. It's exactly the same pattern. And it's much easier for somebody who comes across it first time like me, thinking that I'm probably going mad, that I see things probably in the wrong light, doubting myself, without history context. So the more history is known to the younger mothers, the faster they will learn how to navigate this reality. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much, Maria, for that point. I know what you. I also saw that these stories, contemporary and historic, about Switzerland. Yeah. Or should we wrap up? James, Breda, would you like to have any last words? Are there any burning questions left in the audience?
No, not really. I mean, as I said, if Breda can give you my email, my Twitter address, if anyone wants to contact me, I can't just people that are in the same position, that are interested in taking on the government at some stage, because I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, I attempted to take the to bring a civil case against my abusers, but when I was the fees that I was quoted were so astronomical that I just couldn't do it. I just didn't have enough money, and whether I'd win or not, of course, was the other, or whether I'd actually get it into court because of the Limitation Act. That was another problem. So I had to abandon it, and everyone that tries finds themselves, well, mostly in the same position, that they haven't got the finances, and there are barristers out there surely that would do it pro bono to a degree, because this is not just about me and my brothers. This is about a whole generation of children. That's not just it's not what happened to them is bad enough, but it has affected their whole families and their children. And this is something that the government shouldn't get away with. It's something that should be addressed. And I was hoping that some barristers out there would at least consider giving advice on a limited scale, if necessary, and give us the opportunity of not having to worry about every single penny that we have in our pocket is going to go. We might even have to remortgage our homes. That is not what should be happening. Everyone should stand up for children. I mean, you hear things about, well, I'm an animal lover, and when you hear something about a dog that's been abandoned, you hear all this, oh my God, we have to. I saw a case today actually on television here, a dog that was, this is quite funny. He had 6 legs, this dog, and they have collected £30,000 to give this dog the operation. Now, I know that it's a nice thing to do, but when it comes to children, sometimes we just get left behind. I mean, children of the 60s and the 50s that we were seen and not heard. I was told several times by my family when their relatives came to go out and sit in the hay shed. You know, we weren't part of a family. We weren't recognized then, and we're not recognized now.
Can I just add, sorry, can I add that I will give you James's Twitter, because I'm on my phone and we have storm, gale force winds outside, and it's so difficult to even manage to type anything at the minute. But I will send it to you in the next 10 or 15 minutes, Natalie, privately, and then you can put it into the chat for the later on session. I think I would go further and say that, than James, and say that in Ireland, we want to support people in Switzerland. I was really interested in what Maria said there, because again, I don't have that knowledge. When I listened to Rosie, I thought she was amazing. That's the one session I did get the full session of. And I think we're learning, just having little tools that maybe we can utilize to our best advantage within our own jurisdiction, but collectively within Europe or internationally. And share papers. That's so important, so that, you know, we all have access to various academic pieces that will support again and that have set precedents. And so we can share that and perhaps use that in a courtroom setting, or if you have a friendly solicitor or barrister, and just say, can you cast your eye over that and see if perhaps it fits with my case, and can you do something about it? That's where the real power is. Rather than reinventing the wheel, let's share everything we have and learn and help one another. So thank you for that. And thanks, James, for all you've said today. It's been inspirational as always.
Actually, can I mention something as well?
Please go ahead.
It's Sophia here. I'm from West London, Berkshire. So very similar to many people on here, you know, the same kind of lived experiences with the miscarriages of justice and the kidnapping of the children. Mine wasn't under PA, it was under FII, as a secondary insult to the DV in the beginning. And whilst we didn't win, in inverted commas, at the court proceedings, what did help was that I had a solicitor firm, a barrister who headed up the firm, and a solicitor that worked under the barrister, that both did not take on any cases from the local authority. And so whilst they came in a little bit too late in the scandal to kind of help me get good results, if and when, well, there's no way to get them back unless there is through court. And when, you know, the time is right to go back to court, I would very gladly go back to the same solicitor and barrister, because, you know, when you're in this situation, you learn to trust no professional that's in the system, and you learn to trust no, you know, no solicitor and barrister. But I feel like if you've got a solicitor and barrister that does not take on any local authority cases, that in itself breeds a lot of authenticity and trust. And and they were working around the clock, giving me. I'm still in touch with them now, and they always want to hear like what's gone wrong, like what's gone right, like how's the birthday, like I can't believe it, not following the court order. Do you want to go back to court? Like all that kind of stuff. So if I had any advice for anyone, it would be to just make sure you're not having anyone represent you that is also working on the side of the defendant, i.e. the local authority. That's what I want to say. Thank you for doing what you're doing, because I think we all think of doing this, but you must have a lot of headspace for listening to all of this. So I envy what you're doing, and thank you on behalf of all of us.
Oh, thanks to everybody. And maybe if we could just take one last question from Nicolette, is that all right? And then I need to get a break and make sure I'm prepared for the next session.
Yes,
Yeah, cool.
I would like that we all get in touch with each other, because on the European Union level, it is possible to make a bigger collective complaint against the Hague Child Abduction Convention, against the Hague Adoption Protection, and against the Hague Child Protection Convention. So the EU must exit, we call it with Natalie, exit all the Hague Convention. They should be not implemented between the EU member states. And we should get solidarity action from all other victims, mother-baby homes, all other victims. So if we can launch a huge group complaint supported by other survivors also from the UK and around the world, that will rock the boat. So I think this is an, yeah.
There are Irish mothers who are teed up to do this. Yeah. So,
yes, absolutely.
Can
I just butt in for a second?
Can I just say one thing before we go? In June, my brother David and I and Peter Mulryan engaged in the Justice Initiative of Europe. They came and interviewed us, and they've done a big project on abused children throughout Europe. I attended an exhibition in Dublin just before I went to Australia, and we presented 5,500 signatures to the European Parliament recently. So I'm hoping that maybe something will become of that on behalf of all abused children throughout Europe. You know, and the other thing that I've tried, and it just goes to show you that people don't want to hear about us. I actually contacted the BBC, told them that I was a British citizen and a bit of my story. They said, "Oh, we have no jurisdiction over that. We're not prepared to do an interview." I even tried what's called the Late Late Show here not here in Dublin, and gave them an outline of my story, and they didn't even reply. This is the kind of thing that we're up against when these I mean, they'll have all kinds of film stars and whatever else is on there that's topical and of interest. But when it comes to children that are in positions like we were in, they don't seem to want to know. So that was just another point I made about the lack of cooperation between the people like the BBC and the Late Late Show. They could do a lot for our cause and for the cause of many survivors, but not even to get a reply was it was hard to take in your own country.
We've all had similar experiences, and actually what you said about the United Kingdom refusing to take jurisdiction, same with me and my children, actually. Yeah, but I think perseverance will pay off. We especially, you know.
That's it.
Yeah. I think Carol just wanted to have perhaps maybe one final word, and that I need a break.
I think you're incredibly brave, James, to say what you say. Can people look at Scotland? Scotland's just passed a bill thing that they are compensating, I believe, up to 10,000 or some like that, the survivors. So if people couldn't just look at Scotland, we certainly came up here and found that, for an example, in England, if you voluntarily move out from your abuser, you are not housed. In Scotland, it's one of the top criteria for getting mother and children into a social house.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Shall we wrap it up then, and maybe a big round of applause and a massive thank you to James and Breda for speaking with us and for your amazing campaigning work, and wishing you all the best of luck. And I think we're all so grateful to connect with you, and look forward to being in touch with you in the very near future and working together.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye.
James.
Thank you.
All the very best. Right.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. So see you at the top of the hour.